Kia ora and welcome to Comfort.ai, making artificial intelligence your comfort zone. In this episode of Ethics Talks, I'm super excited to be joined by my very good friend, Dr. Reza Jarral, who has a background in AI ethics and the medical industry. So I'm really looking forward to this chat with you. Before I jump into any Q&A, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Kia ora Saba, kia ora tātou, ko kei tū te maunga, ko Reza Jarral te awa, e noho ona ao ke Ponsonby, ko Jarral tōku whānau, ko Reza tōku ingoa. Thank you so much for having me, Saba. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be here. So I'm a medical doctor. I practice as a GP in Auckland. I'm also the clinical director of Care HQ, which is a virtual health service that delivers consultations through an app.
Yeah.
And I'm the clinical director for equity at ProCare, which is the largest primary healthcare organisation in New Zealand.
Wow, that's your new gig, right?
That's right.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
About 2 weeks into
That's
it.
awesome.
But I managed to get COVID on my first day, which was not ideal. Yeah. I'm better now.
Okay, we're glad you're better. We're glad you're better, and I appreciate the fact that you made time and effort to come and do this interview.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So there are two aspects I want to dive into today with you. One is the medical kind of industry, and then the other one is the AI industry and the impact that has on the medical side.
Sure.
But before any of that, what I would love to know is, what is your definition of ethics?
That's a great question, Saba. I think first off, I'll say what ethics isn't to me. So ethics isn't a tick box exercise. It's not about compliance. I mean, compliance is a really important, underrated part of ethics. For me, ethics is about doing the right thing and being accountable to the people that you're serving, to your stakeholders, to society, being accountable to future generations. And doing the right thing isn't always easy, and it doesn't always lead to the fastest way to revenue, but it involves looking to the future and ensuring that you mitigate as much as possible for unintended harms, even if your intentions are good, particularly when it comes to scalable technology that's embraced by society. So to boil it down into a simple term, I would just say ethics is about doing the right thing.
Yeah. Do you have any examples, whether in your personal life or career, or something you've seen that, someone that has demonstrated that practically?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say there are lots of ethical practitioners in healthcare. I mean, innately, healthcare tends to attract people who want to do good, people who have that altruistic sense. And I know that you have that in yourself as well, Saba. That's what drives you to do what you do. And that's how our work has coalesced a few times over the past few years. That drive to do good is really present in lots of individuals that I'm lucky enough to work with. For example, at ProCare, at my new role, we have an entire equity team whose entire purpose is to try and deliver more fair outcomes for all New Zealanders, no matter your skin colour or race or background or education. And that's really hard work, because you're fighting against some really difficult structural things in society that are not easy to change, such as equity, such as finance and education, geographical issues. So I know lots of people individually and collectively who are working in the ethics space.
Yeah, I like the fact that you use the word fair as opposed to equal.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. Do you want to give us a bit more insights as to why?
Yeah, sure. It's a difficult concept to understand at first, but really it's pretty simple if you think about it. Equity is more about looking at outcomes and ensuring that as a society we collectively try and make sure that everyone has similar outcomes as much as possible. We're not all the same, so we're never going to have the same outcomes. That might be your rate of stroke or your rate of cancer or the quality of treatment you get. And that should really be similar across all different types of society, not just exclusive to people who have money and education. Equality is different. So that would mean applying the same approach to everyone, regardless of who they are. But unfortunately, while I would love for that to work, in a society that's inherently unbalanced, if you apply an equal approach to everyone, you will get unequal results. You will be inequitable. And that's why there's so much effort on making things fair in healthcare and looking at diversity and inclusion and measuring things. And to some people that might seem obtuse, reverse racism. Why are you putting more effort into Maori and Pacifica stuff? That seems racist to them. But what they need to appreciate is that equity is about trying to bring all of us up so that a rising tide raises all boats, not just certain demographic strata.
Yeah, yeah, I like that, and I have kind of been involved with some events that are like it's about inclusion, but it's exclusive to a particular gender, and at times, not always, when people kind of object to that, and I'm like, well, if you put in something exclusive for the excluded, then you give them an opportunity to actually shine and rise among the others as
Absolutely.
well.
We have to make really concerted efforts in diversity and inclusion, and that might seem counterintuitive. I appreciate how that might seem to some people, but there's some nuance there, and we have to really go against the current of trends so that we can bring all of us up, and that might mean pushing certain people to the forefront, and that's because we need their viewpoints and we need their participation so that we can achieve better outcomes and tackle the challenges that we're facing today.
No, I love that. I love that. So let's keep that in the back of our minds as we go through this, because I also want to dive into AI, because I know you also did some studying. And so tell us a bit about what your definition of AI is. How does it fit into your world? What did you study?
Sure. So the reason I got involved in AI and technology is because I think, like many physicians, I was treating one patient at a time and seeing incomplete results. So patients were often being affected by those social things that I was telling you about their financial background, their education, and that was outside of my consultation room. That was in society, and I didn't really have any power over those complex intersectional things. I could only prescribe or refer or treat. And those things don't work. Those interventions don't work unless you tackle the social determinants of health. So then I thought, well, where's the future? Technology is increasingly embedded in our social lives, our biological well-being. We're in the fourth industrial revolution. If I'm really going to advocate for my patients and their far now, I need to be involved in technology. So then that took me to Tech Futures Lab to do a master's in artificial intelligence, looking at the ethics and the ethical approaches that we can take to make these technologies more fair and improve the outcomes for more people. And that led me to work with the World Health Organization, who I still work with, trying to benchmark and create safety tools around AI symptom checkers, and work with IEEE as well, looking at how we can create business tools to make more fair and equitable AI for more groups of people. So that's P7010. That's a standard that we produce that businesses can use and deploy to try and scan the horizon for how their AI will impact certain populations using extra holistic measures that you wouldn't normally measure, KPIs that you wouldn't think of. So that's P7010.
What is that? Tell us about some of those KPIs. I'm going to write that down.
Absolutely. P7010, IEEE, give it a Google and you will find it. So we created a dashboard of different things that you can measure for different types of AI depending on your application of AI. So for example, if you have an autonomous vehicle, you might look at the petrol saved, the time saved, the efficiency, the monetary benefits over the long term of using electric versus petrol. But you might also find that your users are arriving to work less stressed. If you've driven in Auckland, you'll know how stressful that is. So are we measuring stress? Are we measuring well-being in that sense? How could we measure stress? What are the validated metrics for measuring someone's stress levels or anxiety? And should we be measuring that when we're looking at AI? And if they're less stressed, what's the impact on their marital status, on their productivity? So trying to look at more holistic measures of human well-being in relation to technology, and get businesses to think about prioritizing those KPIs above perhaps some of the monetary ones which are driving innovation right now. It's all about money, and that is an important part of innovation. You do need to be commercially successful, but we just really want that corporate social responsibility to take a higher priority.
That's interesting. I'd never heard about that, but the question I have is, when you measure something like someone's stress level, especially especially when that data is available to their workplace, right? Especially when you are trying to understand how that impacts their productivity. There seems to be somewhat of a unintended consequence here as well. So what are the measures that are put in place so that that's not used against some people. Because when it is, I've learned that people start gaming the system,
Yeah.
giving wrong data or just pretending, like, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
right? So what have you done to like prevent that?
So I think when it comes to creating any responsible technology, and this isn't just AI, this is anything that's you're going to deploy, you can't just take one approach and hope that it will improve outcomes. I think you need to take a multimodal set of approaches involving different techniques, different people at different phases in your product life cycle, so that, as you said, you can mitigate for those unintended. You don't know what effect this will have in 10, 15 years. And like you said, it might start to become a perverse system, an Orwellian system where your employer watches at your every move, uses facial recognition to see if you're looking at your work, that type of thing. That's a nightmare future, a dystopia that we don't want. So there are so many different approaches that you can use. I would say regulation is an important one, external regulation and governance. It's boring, it's not sexy, but it's such an important, especially for healthcare, it's the heart of ethical technology, safety and compliance, whether it be GDPR, ISO standards, MDR standards. It's boring, but you do need quality management systems in place to make sure you don't hurt people, first and foremost. I would say education across your organization, from the C-suite down to the grassroots. Everyone needs to be on board culturally that responsibility is all of our, ethics is all of our responsibility, and you need to whistleblow if you see something going wrong, and whistleblowing needs to have impact as well. I think the public need to be educated about algorithms and how they impact their lives, and how accepting those terms and conditions on every app might not be the right thing to do, and submitting their genealogy information might not be in their interests. I think audit is really important. Again, a boring approach, but it's important. We've seen demonstrated benefits from algorithmic audit, making sure that these systems aren't negatively impacting certain demographics. And as we said, diversity and inclusion is a really important factor as well. So there are so many different approaches. They're multimodal. One on their own won't work. We need to take a really holistic approach, and we need to be collaborative and interdisciplinary. That's why I think it's great that you get a clinician on talking to you, because I don't necessarily have the technical knowledge you do, but maybe I could share a perspective that you wouldn't not necessarily get if you hadn't spoken to a clinician.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's important and I think one of the trends that I see, and one of the potential dangers of AI, is that I see technologists create solutions for different sectors, be it healthcare or education, and sometimes they lose sight of the fact that throughout that development process you need a doctor. If you're creating something for patients, you need a doctor to develop this with you. Like, it's not just the technology. Or if you're developing something for the education system, you need a teacher with you, like someone with that experience who can give you insights. So how much of this collaboration do you see happen between the two industries at the moment?
Co-design is just so important, and it's a no-brainer. I mean, you produce better products and results when you have fewer blind spots in your development, by involving more people. And we now see that user-led design, so patient-driven innovation, actually improves your financial metrics as well when it comes to pharmaceutical design in healthcare as well. So there's a financial argument for it as well as an ethical one. So it's an absolute no-brainer, and it blows my mind how many products are developed. They're taken all the way down to capital raise without involving a user. It blows my mind. I'm like, how could you do this? You're shooting yourself in the foot. And there are some good friends of mine who are working on really cool solutions out of Berlin about distributing that whole user led design process by onboarding clinicians, for example, onto a platform. And then if you have a startup, you can go to that platform and hire them out, that network of clinicians, and remotely they can come online and test your software and give you feedback. And that type of distributed network of testers is a really cool idea, and I think the future is all about distributed networks. I know you're involved in sensor tech, so that's your world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is these days. So yeah, it's very interesting. I like that idea. So create something, put it online, let users just and there would potentially be many users who are happy to just give you advice and like share their knowledge. That's really good. And so one thing that always fascinates me about the medical industry, and it fascinates me because the people that work in this field are superheroes. Honestly, like, hands down, you guys are just amazing because for me, like I know I have an absolute fear of this, this whole world, and then I'm like, if it wasn't for these people, just imagine how many of us would have been dead by now. So, and then having, in my research, what I've seen is, 30% of the AI investments are going to healthcare.
Right.
And majority of the work that's being done is done into healthcare. I can only imagine that COVID just, accelerated that as well. What are some of the key takeaways? And healthcare itself has been on a journey from a regulation standpoint as well. Like if you read the history of things they used to do back in the days that they're no longer able to do, and the lives that have been destroyed. What are some of the key takeaways that the technologists in the AI industry can learn from medical industry regulation?
That's a really good point, and thank you. I've learned a lot from what you're saying. Yeah, we should have a chat after this as well. There's so much that you need to share the notes that you got. So 30% of investments into AI are healthcare. Yes. I didn't even know that. That's amazing.
That's a 2018 report. I'll share it with you.
I'm not surprised. And actually with COVID that'll be even higher probably.
Yeah.
So I think you make a couple of interesting points. One is about how things are changing. So when it comes to being responsible and ethical, I think we have to accept that inherently is a slightly subjective thing. And the way in which we evaluate that is going to be seen through a lens of what's socially acceptable at the time. Things that we did a decade or two ago are no longer acceptable. And in the future, things that we're doing now will no longer be acceptable. So if you want to be responsible, if you want to be accountable to future generations, you always need to have your finger on that pulse of what the Overton window is. What is the window of accepted beliefs, social and political, of society at the time? And that's why it's really important to have so many different people involved, because actually, as I get older, I look at Gen Z and they're doing and thinking and saying things that we didn't as millennials. So I often have to make sure that I ground myself in what the kids are doing and thinking today, because it's not intuitive to me actually, and they can educate me very much on where things are going. In terms of healthcare and technology and the ethical conversion of the two, it's quite interesting. If you look at the ethics of healthcare dating back thousands of years to Hippocrates, who is a Greek physician, he was considered the modern father of healthcare. And he generated this Hippocratic oath, or his ideas and thoughts led to a Hippocratic oath. And the Hippocratic oath is what all physicians will pledge when they graduate, And the founding premise of that is do no harm as a first priority. If you're going to do something to try and help people, the least you could do is not hurt them. And that's easier said than done. But in this day and age, with this fourth industrial revolution, a world powered by zeros and ones, that Hippocratic oath is starting to look quite dusty. We need a Hippocratic oath 2.0 that actually helps us safeguard our patients from the digital world and the harms that can come from the digital world. And it should be talking about privacy, a right to be forgotten, autonomy, fairness, justice, explainability. All of these principles need to be taught to healthcare professionals so that we're aware and we can mitigate for the harms that might come to our patients when they engage with digital therapeutics or even just TikTok. A lot of Gen Z get their medical education from TikTok, which blows my mind, but it's just a reality and we have to live with it now. So we need to look at how these algorithms influence our behavior and potentially polarize some of our thoughts as well.
That's interesting. Like when you think about AI, algorithms, technology that's impacting healthcare, more, often people think about, what are the technologies that, are going to improve something in, a surgery room or in the hospital. But you are right. This generation is getting a lot of medical advice from TikTok and Instagram. I've seen doctors. On Instagram,
not me.
Not
me. You won't find me on TikTok.
No, I know, but it was like some of them, they look legit to me, and some don't. Some give like really weird advice that I'm like, I'm not a doctor, I don't know what that is, but I'm pretty sure that's not right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, And then, I mean, we saw with COVID as well, like how much misinformation, like it was spreading faster than the virus itself.
Yeah.
It was really, really scary. Thank you for sharing those points of views with us. In terms of the developments of AI developments, are there any developments that worry you, that scare you, that you've seen and you're like, if I had a magic wand, I would stop this right now?
Yeah, look, there are so many documented cases already of AI being in contention with human fundamental rights and the environmental rights as well of this planet. Just three that spring to mind recently include a screening tool that was deployed in Allegheny in the US to try and help social workers decide if a child should be taken away from their family. And the screening tool used historic data and machine learning, and it was found, unsurprisingly, to be quite biased against poorer families, for better or worse. And what's quite interesting about that scenario is that it gave the user, so we need to talk more about the human AI interface, because that's a really integral part, gave the user a green light, a yellow light, or a red light, a traffic light system of risk. And you can imagine whenever there was a red light, humans we're very risk averse. The way we interpret risk, if there's a high risk, even if it's a tiny chance, we don't like it. So whenever there was a red light, basically the humans were like, no, I'm not taking a risk. That kid gets taken away from the family. So the Allegheny tool was quite concerning. Babylon in the UK are a massive company. Now they've expanded to the US. I think they're worth many, many billions in their recent capital raise. They deploy a symptom checker, and it was found to be sexist against women with symptoms of a heart attack. So kind of downplayed them. And that was probably from historic data where physicians were originally quite sexist and downplayed women's symptoms as they presented with chest pain. It's all right, dear, it's just heartburn, don't worry. You go home and take some paracetamol. That type of paternalistic attitude bled through into the symptom checker. And then more recently, Optum in the US was an algorithm deployed to help decide who gets treatment, and it used historic data. And it was racist against Hispanics and blacks. And I think that the common theme there is, how do you use historic data in an ethical way? Because history is not straightforward, and it's littered with those social determinants and biases that we said. And I think, for me personally, if you're going to use historic data, you need a historian, you need an anthropologist, a social scientist to help you understand why the patterns are there in that data. If you don't understand the historic implications of it, all you will do is exemplify the bias in that, amplify the disparity in that data as you go forward in future generations. That's just healthcare. Imagine finance and all the other places, welfare, where these algorithms are being used to save time and automate things. We really need to look at that data with a richer tool set.
No, that's right. I think they're just like us. They're biased like us. They're just biased faster and bigger.
That's a good way of putting it. I love it. That's so good.
For anyone who's watching this, there are two documentaries I highly recommend, and I'll put the links in the bio, in the description. One is called Terms and Conditions May Apply. It's an old documentary, very, very eye-opening. The other one is called Coded Bias.
Right.
It's about exactly this issue with, I think that my favorite quote from that documentary is, the future is here, it's just not very evenly distributed. And most times when people think or hear that, they're like, oh, technology is available to the rich, the top 1%. What they show in this documentary is, in fact, it's the exact opposite. The tech that's not 100% validated is actually being implemented on societies and areas where they don't actually have a lot of control and a lot of say. So that's really sad. Thank you for that. Let me see how we're doing for time. One question. Okay, so we went through the developments you want to stop. Is there anything you wanted me to ask you that I didn't ask you?
No, I think that's a good. I do that in healthcare. I always say, is there anything that I've left out that you to the patient just to make sure I haven't missed anything. I guess we could end on an optimistic note.
Yeah.
You know, what's the take-home message, that type of thing.
Yes, please.
Look, I would say to anyone who's watching this, it can be quite depressing when you think about all the potential harms that these technologies and how pervasive they will be in the future. But what I would say is that, you know, we have a couple of paths in front of us. We can allow this technology to exemplify bias in society, polarize our political views, amplify surveillance policing, or we can use it to discover new drugs and treatments that might improve our health. We can use it to do the mundane tasks that bore us so much and allow us to enjoy life and achieve economic prosperity. The difference between those paths will be our engagement, I believe. It will be our participation, and I would encourage anyone who's watching, anyone who feels that they don't have a voice or don't know enough, or perhaps they're the first one in their family to get this type of education, please go out there and find mentors, go out there and do some learning, go on edX, do some courses, because we need your voice. You're exactly the person we need, and it'll be your participation that helps us navigate those paths and choose a brighter future.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great point. And on that note, I would like to say the invitations to come on Ethics Talks are open to anyone who wants to share their point of view, whether you're in New Zealand or offshore. These talks and these interviews are so that we can actually amplify the voices of different people from different backgrounds. So you don't necessarily have to come from a technology background or an AI background. If you want to talk about your industry, your experience, please make sure you get in touch with me, and I'll make sure to schedule an interview with you. Thank you so much, Reza. There's so many gold nuggets here that we've touched on today that I feel like we might have a follow-up interview if you're up for it. We'll
Always
see.
up for it.
Yeah.
And I'll be feeling better as well next time.
Oh yeah.
I'll be better recovered from COVID.
Yeah. So. Oh, again, I really appreciate the fact that you came and did this with us today. So for any of you in the audience, please let me know if you have any questions for me or for Dr. Reza, if there are any resources you'd like me to share with you. And until the next Ethics Talks or the next content from Comfort AI, remember, technology can be fun, fashionable, and fabulous.